You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Homefield Apparel.
Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to a debut episode of a new podcast that we're launching here on the Back Home Network. I'm Galen, Clavio. This is Matt Blaszka. If you are an astute observer of Back Home Network / Crimson Cast lore, Matt is no stranger. He's been on multiple podcasts, was actually our producer and call screener back in the Blog Talk Radio days back in the day. It was a long time ago, wasn't it?
2012, 13.
Yeah, it felt like a different world.
The good old days.
It was kind of a different world, honestly. But no, Matt and I have had a lot of conversations over time, specifically about college football. And with everything going on, you've obviously, I think, listened to some of the NIL and house settlement podcasts that we've been doing here on the network. But we really wanted to launch a show that was specifically devoted to college football with not the same level of SEC focus that you hear with what seems like every other podcast that's out there.
Right.
So we're going to give this a shot. We're calling it Football Weather. And it's going to have a little bit of everything. There's going to be a lot of structural talk specifically about what's going on with college football, as there's a ton that's changing or could potentially change. There's a ton that changed already. We're coming off the first year of the 12-team playoff. But we're also going to talk about what's going on in college football on a week-by-week basis throughout the course of this upcoming season. Hopefully it's something that you're all going to enjoy. And Matt, I know I'm looking forward to it. Give the people kind of your background on the college football front and what makes this such a fascinating topic for you.
Yeah, I've always loved college football. It's been, growing up, we grew up in the Northeast. It was all professional football, and I moved to Atlanta, and that's all they talked about was college football. And that's all they do, right, in the SEC. And I moved up here, and Indiana football wasn't a thing, but I really still followed it, and it's probably my favorite sport now. I mean, the NFL, the Jets have been terrible now for 2 decades almost, so football has sort of college football and the business side of it is really interesting to me. So we've chatted a lot about the different different playoff formats and the NIL, and it's really intriguing to me, both the business side, what's on the field, and I love Saturdays. I think Saturdays is really what sport is all about the camaraderie, the pageantry of what college football is unique to unique to what we have here in the U.S. compared to anything else.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating environment. And one, honestly, I think a lot of IU fans are still getting their heads wrapped around, which is another reason why we felt this would be a good podcast. This is not just aimed at IU fans. Like, this is something that's meant to be more regional, more national in nature, as, the landscape's changing. And I feel like to some degree, it almost felt like college football increasingly was becoming the reserve of just the Southeastern Conference and maybe one or two other brands. And I feel like we've seen a pushback on that. And some of that is the NIL era and now the evening out of what was a very uneven financial landscape behind the scenes. But it's also, I think, a natural adaptation to talent cycles. I think there's more good football players coming from a wider variety of places. Training's a bit different now. And now you've got, I think, to some degree, like increasingly, you're able to have arguments for talent to come play in a variety of different places, because it's not just about, there's bowls, and maybe you'll be good this year, and maybe not. Now there's like a tangible pathway, and now you can look and say, well, any one of a number of options, if I'm a player, might be a good place to go play football. The whole thing's fascinating to me on that front. The whole thing's fascinating in terms of the innovation that happens at the college level on both sides of the ball, far more so than what we see in the NFL. Mm-hmm. And it's just got a lot of extra juice to it. And it's nothing against the NFL, but the NFL, it's kind of like thinking about the NBA versus college basketball, where you have the pinnacle of the sport, but that almost means that there's not room for innovation because there's only a very limited number of ways to do things. And I feel like with college football, a lot of Midwestern fans have kind of felt left out of the conversation, and now they're not necessarily left out of the conversation anymore.
Part of the issues for the history of college football, there's no structure, right? We've only had a true quote unquote playoff since 2014. So and a true real playoff since last year. So generally the 4-team playoff was a Southeastern, invitational, not, for lack of a better word. And now we're sitting in a spot again where they're trying to reinvent the playoff. There's nobody in charge at the wheel, like you've seen over and over again. And just yesterday they said they're starting from scratch again, and they have to have a decision the next December. So 6 months to figure out what the playoff for 2026 is going to be and how that's going to change the landscape of how the towns can be distributed and how we're going to view college football. And certainly here, obviously we're not going to be an IU focused podcast, but certainly we saw the fruits of that last year here of how much it meant to just this community. And it will be more impactful to others, whatever they decide to do.
Yeah. And so we're going to dive into some of that today as those meetings are going on as we speak, essentially. And what ends up happening or not happening will have a lot of impacts in a lot of different ways. But before we do that, just a quick reminder, we are brought to you by Home Field Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs, the spiritual home of college football fandom. I'm not sure if they're actually marketing themselves as such, but I just essentially have decided that will be the new branding. Matt wore the Strut of Destiny shirt, one of my favorites, but I was like, they don't have a football team, Matt. So hence I had to go ahead and opt in for the Boise State shirt. But you can find these shirts on the site. You can find thousands is a good word, of other shirts that are directly related to college football. Big schools, medium schools, small schools. I mean, there's you big Grand Valley State fan. I mean, they got a bunch of stuff on there from that level. So head over to homefieldapparel.com, use the code HOME23, get 15% off your first order. And you can also keep up to speed on what's going on by subscribing to their newsletter, getting into their text messages, and keeping an eye on what's going on social media-wise. So again, homefieldapparel.com, go check them out and let them know that we sent you. Also, just a reminder that this podcast, like the rest of the network's podcast, is on YouTube. Just search Back Home Network on YouTube, and you'll find all of our shows, not just Football Weather, but Crimson Cast, Assembly Call, the Doing the Work podcast, which focuses on the women's basketball team, X's and Joe's, the Dribble Drive, new shows coming up soon that we're looking forward to revealing here over the next month and a half. We'd love to have you as part of the YouTube audience, and hopefully you'll go ahead and subscribe. All right, let's dive into it, Matt, let's go ahead and talk about this playoff formatting. So a lot going on, and I think the easiest way to maybe enter into this is resetting where we're at right now. So as most of you in the fan base are aware, on the Indiana front at least, 12-team playoff this last year, and that mostly seemed to work. The one weird aspect was the funky seeding, which deprived Indiana of a home game, but also set up a situation where neither Ohio State nor Notre Dame could have a bye, and you end up with all four of the bye teams losing very early on in the process. I think in the first game, that was tweaked though, and so now we're on straight seeding. There's no guaranteed seeds for the conference champions, but that's just the beginning of what is becoming an increasingly contentious argument.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, we had the change to the straight seeding this year, and I think that will certainly help. But as we've seen here, the conversation's been ongoing since then. Do we stay at 12? Do we go to 14? Do we go to 16? I think it seems like Sankey has a good idea of what's going on or what he wants to do, and the Big Ten's playing the other side of it, right? But we don't hear a lot from our commissioner here, Tony Petitti. So it's really difficult, I think, from a Big Ten standpoint of, okay, what is the purpose of this other model of the 4-2-2, 4-2-2-1? Or the current model of the 5+7 or the 5+11. So I think there's a lot out there of exactly what would be best for the Big Ten.
So, we've seen the Big Ten starting to get a little bit of proxy conversation out there where they, Brett Bielema went out and basically said what we assumed the Big Ten's attitude was on this, which is we're not going to go to a 5+11 and base it off of strength of schedule or strength of record if the SEC isn't going to move to a 9-game conference, conference schedule. And this is one of the big aspects that I think people lose in the shuffle. And frankly, I don't think the media has done a great job of covering why it's important. So the SEC, if you think back to those interminable arguments that were being put forward in November and early December last year, it was all strength of schedule. Oh, they play such tougher schedules in the SEC. Like that was the drumbeat. Meanwhile, you got Alabama going out and losing to Oklahoma. You got Ole Miss going out and losing to Florida, Kentucky. And, it's like, well, okay, we get your schedule looks good on paper. There's some issues there that we need to talk about just in terms of how that's calculated. But you're losing those games and you're also playing one less guaranteed conference game, which the Big Ten opted into a while ago, and the other conferences have now opted into as well. So you're not talking about an even surface when it comes to selecting teams, because you are really comparing apples and oranges in a lot of these cases. And so from the Big Ten's perspective, they're looking at it, and from how we talk about college sports, it goes to a fundamental issue that I think a lot of media members struggle with, which is many of them are still thinking about college football as if we're in an era where the conferences were small enough that you would essentially be playing a critical mass of teams and getting a sense of who the actual champion was, who the best team was. That's not what's happening right now in any of these leagues, because they're too big.
Right. And even if the SEC goes to 9, right, they're only playing 9 of the 15 other teams. The Big Ten plays 9 of the 17 teams. So regardless of what you're doing, you're not going to get a true champion. So while I think fans certainly, and maybe you and I are on a different page here, the automatic qualifiers seem to make sense in a way for the Big Ten to go down that route, right? It gives them the opportunity to have, we have 4 automatic spots. It gives those Iowas and probably Indianas in that aspect a better opportunity to compete for those spots year in, year out. Because if otherwise you're going to have Oregon and you're going to have all those other schools continually, Ohio State continually gobble up those spots, and then you're not going to have this balanced out approach, right? So when we think about the same thing, so if the SEC happens to go to 9 games, okay, now we're on a balance, we're on the same level, and then if you add that SEC versus Big Ten or whatever, now you got 10 games, and now you can actually maybe factor in strength of schedule a little bit more. Certainly. That's how the basketball does. They're able to have all these various touch points. It doesn't exist in football because there's not a lot of cross pollination.
Well, yeah, part of the issue is strength of schedule is so susceptible to gaming, and we've seen this in the NCAA basketball tournament, where you'll have teams that are able to stack particular types of wins that give them a much better net rating than what they actually accomplished if you look at the quality of the teams that they played. Because so much of this is going all the way back to the old RPI formula that the NCAA uses, not just for basketball, but for everything, or used to use for basketball, but still uses for the other sports, is 50% or 25% who you played, 50% who those teams played, and 25% who those teams played, your opponent's opponents. But how are you measuring that? Is it the strength of those actual teams? Is it straight record? If I'm the Big Ten, I am immediately suspicious of leaning the selection process on metrics that are going to give an advantage to the SEC if they are loading up their schedules with extra cream puffs to inflate win records, which, when people criticize Big Ten schools for playing weaker non-conference schedules, well, the reason they do it is they've got 9 conference games. You don't have that flexibility, and it's clear still that the selection committee looks at losses as being the ultimate disqualifier from a lot of this. And so, we're kind of caught between 2 models is how I look at it. And the problem is that these conferences have expanded not because it's intelligent to do so from a competition perspective, but because they made more money that way. But they didn't expand far enough where you could just say, hey, we're going to have a Big Ten A division, not 10 teams. You play each other team in the division. You have another one on the other side. Now you've got at least a pretty good sense of who's the best in those 2. Well, then you could give them automatic bids and figure the rest out later. That's not what we've got. Instead, we've got this weird rotational system where, like this year, Indiana's not playing Ohio State and not playing Michigan. This is good for Indiana. But the flip side is they're playing Oregon, they're playing Penn State. But then, there's other teams that those teams are going to miss in the mix as well. The thing I get most frustrated about is this idea that you have any sense of who the actual best teams are at the end of a regular season. And the narrative that somehow that team went 11-1 or that team went 10-2, so therefore they must be in. There's not enough data points, as you said, to really be able to say that for certain. And that bugs me. And I think it's one of the things that has to be considered in this whole process.
Well, it's a challenge for a sport that's always looked at 0 losses as the ultimate goal, right? Or 1 loss, that's the goal. And so last year was a difficult for a lot of fans, I think, to understand, I'm not saying Indiana not belong on that. I'm saying, maybe a 3-loss Alabama is better than Indiana or better than SMU. But we don't it's impossible for us to know, or best possible for, I think, a football fan to understand that, because the changing of what happened, right? The Michigan game for Ohio State last year, they lost that game. Any other year before this in the history of the sport, they would have been out of it. Last year they won the national championship. So I think that's part of the other issue is the college football fan who's been around forever, who's, some of them still want to go back to just the what a BCS or
right.
or regionalized. It's not going to happen. But certainly that's a really big piece, is training fans that matters. But also, as you said, there's not going to be this idea of the same schedule, the schedules being exactly the same, right? Georgia played an unbelievable schedule last year. They went 9. If they went 9-3, probably would still been in. Maybe, I don't know. Texas last year, they played the weakest schedule out of all the teams. Went 11-1. If they lose one of another games, they're probably out just based on the scheduling.
Right.
So that's what, to your point, it just can't be just about the interconference schedule. There has to be other elements of this. And what gets lost in the shuffle is, okay, how much you to beat a team by, all these other factors. And someone smarter than me probably needs to come up with maybe a formula that's going to make this work. Or you do go to this AQ model, and that makes it more meaningful inside the conference.
Yeah, the problem, and if you go back and look at the way the BCS was handled, people hated the BCS, but I don't think they hated the BCS for the reasons that media hated the BCS. Media hated the BCS because there were they didn't really understand the computers and the data points, and there was a real resistance to giving up the idea that we need humans ranking these things. Fans, I think, were fine, with the computers to some degree, but the problem was you only had 2 teams at the end. Like, you weren't filling out a full field. So much of the issue that we have with all of this is that when you're putting a committee in charge, when you're making selections, as opposed to you get here in your standings, you get here with your record, you get to go to the playoffs. Like, there's a reason the NFL doesn't have a committee that chooses its playoff teams. They have divisional champions, they have wild card teams, and then they go out and play. And no one complains when a team misses the playoffs, because there's 7 out of the 16 teams in your division, in your conference, get to the playoffs. And there's a clear set of criteria and a clear pathway to do that. It's the same thing in the NBA. Like, nobody complains if your team misses the playoffs, because you knew you had to win that many games. And that doesn't exist in college football. It also doesn't exist in college basketball. But I think the difference there is that there's so many teams that the teams that we're arguing about are far enough down the list that, unless it's something egregious, like, say, North Carolina's athletic director, like, elbowing his team in when they don't deserve to be there, most of the time there's not that much meaningful controversy about it. The problem, though, is that all of those things that I mentioned, putting college basketball aside, NFL, NBA, these were all things the owners and the players got together and decided upon and said, this is the format. They've tweaked the format over time. They got together and actually decided something because they were all essentially on the same page that they wanted a good product. Nobody's on the same page here. And the issue is, again, there's nobody in charge of college football. And so Greg Sankey, Tony Petitti, Brett Yormark, Jim Phillips, like, all of these guys, their only incentive right now is to go put the people that pay them, which is the schools in their conferences, in the best possible scenarios, which is not something that's really conducive to a worthwhile model that people will not get upset about.
Right. And what really makes this even more difficult is we've had one data point, 1 year.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, people freaked out.
Right.
Yeah.
One data point. So, like, as we've said off the pod, and probably you said on your podcast too, Indiana has broken college football, and SMU maybe to a lesser extent. But certainly, if you have more data, maybe next year's completely different, or this year's completely different, right? But to your point, like, a lot of these guys are all the 4 big commissioners. Sankey was on the original playoff. He came up with this playoff. Now, again, there's 5 conferences, but the other 3 guys have been in their jobs less than 3 years at this point, maybe a little more here and there.
Right.
But certainly they see it differently. Tony Petitti, a TV guy, so he's looking for additional revenue for the teams in the conferences. They see that there's more of a chance for marketability in the month of December as they're trying to move that calendar work against the NFL. So there's a lot of pieces here that I think that they need to still suss out. But again, with no actual leader and 4 people working towards their best interest, hence why the SEC meetings last week or whatever, maybe 2 weeks ago, Sankey was all about, he didn't have a say. The coaches said, well, we want a 5+11. All of a sudden they were all about the 5+11, right? So it changed everything once he changed his way. And now we're in a spot where there's no leadership and they ripped it back up and we're starting from scratch again.
Well, because originally there seemed to be a consensus between the Big Ten and the SEC that they wanted automatic qualifiers. They both wanted 3 or 4 automatic bids. That was all the talk in December, January. I'm curious what changed, but I would argue that what changed was probably the realization by the SEC that the Big Ten's won 2 national titles in a row now. The SEC didn't even have a team in the championship game either year. And so what you've ended up with is a group of schools who are incredibly frustrated that they do not have what they view as their rightful seat at the head of the table. And they're looking for answers about how to set the system up in a way that's going to be most advantageous to them getting that seat back at the head of the table. And it's going to be really interesting this year because if you take the politics aside and just look at the teams, I mean, there's a real good chance the SEC might not have one of the top 4 teams in the country this year.
Right.
I mean, depending on how you feel about Penn State, I mean, Clemson's, I think the consensus number 1 or close to it. You've got other teams that are up in that mix. I don't know if Georgia is actually a top 4 team. I don't think Alabama is at this point. Tennessee doesn't have a quarterback. I mean, you've got so many teams for whom they didn't perform last year. They didn't perform the year before. You've got questions even at places like Texas, who should be good, but the new starting quarterback essentially this year. I mean, how do they handle a third year without somebody in the national championship game or a national champion? That has to be playing a little bit on them. And I think they look at this situation and they say automatic qualifiers may actually hurt us because more Big Ten teams guaranteed in there is going to put the SEC in a position where we have to twist what we're doing. The other factor in all of this is the money. And the reason why the SEC is not interested in adding that 9th game, it's really 2 things. One is what we've talked about here. They want to have that extra game for padding, those famous mid-November games against the South Alabamas or whoever.
Yep. Georgia State.
Georgia State, yeah. But it's also that the Big Ten, because of the way that it's structured the Big Ten network, the way that it's structured its media deals, they're already making more money than the SEC with the 9 games. The SEC doesn't want to go to a 9th game without being paid additional money, but that's ESPN. Right. And ESPN doesn't want to pay them extra money because they don't have any extra money to pay them at this point.
Right. ESPN's running out of money to give people. I mean, they just punted on Major League Baseball. So I don't know if that's part of maybe their strategy. Hey, we need to figure out this 9th game for the SEC, or if they're going to add another another round for playoffs. That's 4 more playoff games. So it seems like what you said, they are trying to find more revenue to not say quote unquote catch up to the Big Ten, but they are a little bit behind at this point, right? And certainly in their mind, if we get the 5+11, we're going to probably get more teams in, more likely than not, over the Big Ten every year, right? So that's why they're standing on that soapbox right now. I will say, and I give Sankey credit, he has come out and been the spokesperson for college football now, it seems like, for the last 2, 3, 4 years, right? And as much as Tony Petitti is trying to push these things, it's really difficult from a Big Ten fan perspective. And I get frustrated with it. He says nothing.
Right.
And I think from the Big Ten standpoint, we need to hear something from him, anything. He even, from the meetings this past week, all the commissioners, he was the only commissioner that zoomed in. Don't know what the situation is, but it seems really unusual for the second most powerful person, or for however you want to put him in Sankey, to not even be there, right? Or at least have a presence. So I think that's part of the issue in my mind for the Big Ten as well.
There's a clear media strategy that's being undertaken by Tony Petitti and the Big Ten, which is in line with how they've often done things in the past. I just don't think it necessarily works because you're really dealing with a level of politicking here that goes beyond just what's happening behind the scenes, because the SEC's been flooding the zone now with messaging over and over again about their teams being more deserving. They put this huge presentation together, which was not for their coaches. It was not for their athletic directors. It was for the media, trying to highlight how much more superior SEC teams have been in terms of what they've won and who they've played. And you've got to try to do something in the PR battle other than just have a coach randomly go out and talk to the media and say, well, this, and this. the Big Ten has often, I think, historically struggled with the long game from a public relations perspective and a perceptional perspective. I mean, I'll even go back to the formation of the Big Ten Network and the leaving of ESPN as a primary partner and the partnership with Fox. That was a great financial decision by the Big Ten, and it really set the table for what they've been able to do and where they're at right now, where their schools are making more money than the SEC. But the SEC basically embedding themselves into the ESPN presentation of college football specifically. And now you've got Nick Saban on the set of College Game Day. You've got such an SEC-centric approach to where game day goes, to the fact that ESPN is promoting those games constantly, and that's still where a ton of sports fans are going for the news and information about sports. It filters everything through an SEC lens. And Fox, while they've made great strides, just doesn't have the same heft in terms of getting messages out there. They're just not a place where people go yet to get their opinions about what's going on in college football. And so it's a dangerous game. Yes, you have to win in the boardroom, but ultimately the perception of the sport and the perception of where your team sit within the sport does have to matter. And I do worry when I see Sankey out there doing all of this, that the Big Ten just isn't really, they're approaching it from an arrogance that they should not have at this point, even though they've won the last 2 national titles.
Well, yeah. And so, I mean, you're right. So someone, your SEC has that ESPN connection, and where the Big Ten, they have to almost be, I don't want to say louder, but we need someone to come out there where Brett Bielema had to go through whomever to say last year, even when they weren't even on the fringe of the playoff, he went and did his own research. Hey, we're the same as, I forget what team it was, but X and X, Y, and Z.
Ole
Miss.
Yeah.
That's what it was. And so, like, it's where Sankey was grandstanding all year for his team, strength of schedule, whatever it was, he was grandstanding all year. So if Tony's personality may be very quiet in the background, in the weeds, that's certainly a TV guy's probably perspective compared to where Sankey's a lifelong college guy. But at some point, you're right, there needs to be a better this is where we are. We need to be a bigger voice, because we're in the shadows a little too much, where we're not grandstanding with this automatic qualifier model. No one is really. I mean, even the Big 12 has said, hey, we want the 5+11 now.
Yeah, well, they of course they want it.
Well, yeah, I know.
And this is where it's frustrating with the Big Ten, because it kind of feels like you either have to go for the kill shot. I hate to talk in these terms. I apologize, folks. I mean, we're all friends here, right? But you got to, if you either go for the kill shot and you say there are 2 top conferences and then you've got a lower tier, or you make common cause with the Big 12 and the ACC, like we thought that they were doing with the ACC and the Pac-12,
right?
And it's fascinating. Like, they went for the kill shot there. They got it. They destroyed the Pac-12. And then they threw the ACC to the side, and we're like, sorry, dudes. And now the ACC is like, well, our natural partner is the Big 12, but if we can get the SEC to go along with what we want, we've now outflanked the Big Ten. So I just don't know why you cede that ground and you put yourself in a position. I mean, the one trump card is that if there's not unanimity on format changes, nothing changes.
Nothing happens, yeah.
And it's ironic, because I think that the status quo helps the Big Ten more than it helps the SEC. But a lot of that's going to depend on whether there are tweaks to strength of schedule or strength of record, which is something that's being actively talked about right now.
Well, and there's one point that's, and sorry to take maybe a little bit of a tangent here, but where are these games, or how are they going to play these games, where are they going to play them, is also a big factor. Adding 4 games to a weekend that there's no place to put them except for on a Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, which they're already struggling to figure out what the cadence of the playoff.
Right.
Freeman mentioned that during this playoff, he's like, we had a 4-day break, a 6-day break, a 12. It was like all over the place. So it's hard to prepare for those things if there's no cadence to it. So that's something they need to figure out. And I know I might have been Ross Dellinger was talking about moving everything to week 0, which they've talked about for years, but maybe this is the impetus to do it. So you're not running into the NFL. That's
the thing. You have the immovable object of the NFL. You can't go up against the NFL. I know a lot of college football fans don't understand why, but you can't. Yeah. Just trust me on that. But what's frustrating about college football and the college football playoff structure is there are so many things that are just considered immovable objects. So why haven't they moved the start of the season back a week to week 0? Well, it's largely because then you're you're either getting rid of the conference championships, which a lot of conferences are like, no, we make money off of those, or you're playing playoff games. You have to move the Army-Navy game to a different week because that's the first week that you would have to start playing the playoff games. And like, what's frustrating, it's just part of the landscape with college football, but like we're halfway between eras and the sport has changed. And I know a lot of people in college football don't like some of the changes, but I would argue if you're a Big Ten fan, you should be in favor of the changes. You should be in favor of let's play night games, which the Big Ten, it's funny, you go into the college football playoff game, you can still like be like, you have to toggle on the night games after October 1st. You got Ohio State fans complaining about playing at noon all the time. It's like, do you realize the ratings that you're getting? And you're like, this is the Big Ten front and center. Like there has to be an adaptation mentally in college football in general. And this is where the Big Ten, because they haven't been the dominant power in college football for the last 25 to 30 years, really needs to be embracing their role as the change agent. The problem is that's so culturally antithetical to how Big Ten institutions and the Big Ten as a whole operate. They think they're the Boston Celtics of the sport, where it's like we're above all of this, and it's like you're not. This is where you have to make some alterations to things. Now, we're about to wrap up because we're almost out of time. But breaking news happening right now. Ross Dellinger with a tweet here. In a landmark moment in college sports, the University of Wisconsin has filed a lawsuit against Miami for tampering and eventually poaching a college football player under contract. The Big Ten Conference is supporting Wisconsin's decision to take legal action. The quote that comes, the statement from Dellinger that the Big Ten put out: the Big Ten Conference is aware of the litigation recently filed by the University of Wisconsin-Madison against the University of Miami and is supportive of UW-Madison's position. As alleged, the University of Miami knowingly ignored contractual obligations and disregarded the principle of competitive equity that is fundamental to college athletics. Give me a break. The Big Ten Conference believes that the University of Miami's actions are irreconcilable with a sustainable college sports framework and is supportive of UW-Madison's efforts to preserve it. What do you think of all that?
I thought NIL was not. This wasn't NIL, right? I mean, I was up until this point. That's wild. I remember. I can't remember the kid's name.
Xavier Lucas.
Yeah, when this happened, like he didn't enroll in classes and all these things, and they were thinking about doing this back in January. Now they are officially doing it.
Here's the thing with this. This will be something a lot of college football fans, especially I think Big Ten fans, will be like, "Yeah, great, go after him." But this is where you can't have your cake and eat it too. And what I mean by that is there is nothing preventing a student from going from one institution to another. And if I wanted to throw scholarship money at somebody who was currently enrolled at Indiana or Indiana State or wherever, I could do it and they would come. There's nothing prohibiting that. If you're going to make the argument that there's tampering, what are you tampering with? Right. Are you, what contractual relationship are you tampering with if it's a student, like you keep claiming, and not an employee?
Right, exactly. And so I was just going to say, yeah, there's no way. Like I can drop out of IU and just go register classes tomorrow at Indiana State. There's nothing stopping from doing that. And you're right. If we're not going to pay them, there's not going to be a union. Then what's the tampering? What is it?
That's wild. Yeah. So I'm curious to dive into the documents. Apparently Yahoo Sports has them, but man, I mean, I knew if we started doing this show, stuff like this would pop up. This
is exactly what you said via text. Here's the topics. Okay, we're probably going to have to make a right turn at some point.
I didn't expect it to happen right when the show started. But anyway, we're going to continue to do these shows as we move forward and continue to try to, put in as much of what's going on currently. As we get a little bit closer to the season, we'll be talking through, what does the landscape look like, and talking about some of the big matchups that have happened. And the games you need to be paying attention to. It's one of the great and difficult things about college football. It's easy to lose track of games that matter, especially early in the season, because you're kind of all over the place. But should be a great time. Any final thoughts?
No, I'm looking forward to it. I think we, had a good discussion here, and I hope we can bring new fans in here to not only the Back Home Network, but really college football fans in the Big Ten. I think there's a lot to offer here, so looking forward to it.
Absolutely. We will be back in the future with additional episodes. Be sure to subscribe. This show's got its own Spotify link as well. We'll put that in the comments. But subscribe on YouTube, probably the easiest place to find us as we do these shows moving forward. We haven't set it on a final date yet. but give us some time. We'll get all that worked out as we get closer to college football season. For Matt Blaszka, I'm Galen Clavio. This is Football Weather. Thanks for joining us, folks. We'll catch you on the flip side. So long, everybody.